This is a story about the sound of a ticking clock and the silence of a predator. The taxi door opened to the humid, heavy air of the city. Ilara stepped onto the pavement, her fingers buried deep in the white fur of Ghost, her Samoyed therapy dog. In her pocket, the orange bottle of pills rattled, a reminder of the hospital she'd just left. To the world, she was fragile. To the family in apartment 4B, she was prey. But Ilara was looking at the building with eyes that had already seen it burn. She remembered the first time, the way the burly man across the hall, Mick, had kicked Ghost, the way his mother had spat on Ilara's door, the way they had driven her to the roof until she felt the wind take her. This time, the wind wasn't going to take her. It was going to carry her voice. She was hauling a box into the lobby when the elevator doors slid open. There he was, Mick. He was a mountain of meat and bad intentions, smelling of stale beer and unearned confidence. He blocked her path, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. "New mate," he chuckled, his voice like grinding gravel. "Keep that mutt quiet, or I'll give him a reason to wail." Ilara didn't flinch. She leaned in, her voice a low, melodic whisper that made the hair on Mick's arms stand up. "The countdown has already started, Mick. I'd spend your remaining days being very, very kind." Before he could react, a gloved hand reached out from the shadows of the lobby, pressing the up button. The man was tall, dressed in a suit that cost more than the entire building. A sleek black compression mask covered the lower half of his face, leaving only eyes that burned like cold starlight. Julian Vane, the architect of the city's skyline, lived in the penthouse. He was a myth, a man who bought the building just to ensure he never had to speak to anyone. "Is there a problem?" Julian's voice was a rich baritone, vibrating through the small space. Mick grumbled something and backed away. Julian didn't look at Mick. He looked at Ilara, his gaze lingering on the way she held her dog. He stepped into the elevator and held the door open for her. As she passed him, his arm brushed hers, a brief, searing contact that felt like a bolt of electricity. Over the next week, the nightmare family escalated. Trash was piled at Ilara's door. Mick's son threw rocks at her windows. But every time the darkness closed in, Julian was there. It started with conversation inlets, small moments in the hallway where he would check on her. One evening, after Mick had cornered her in the laundry room, Julian appeared like a vengeful ghost. He didn't fight Mick. He simply looked at him until the bully retreated. Then he turned to Ilara. His hand reached out, brushing a stray hair from her forehead, his thumb lingering on her temple for a heartbeat too long. "Come with me," he murmured. "My floor is the only place in this city where the monsters can't reach." His penthouse was a fortress of glass and velvet. It was a perfect house, a sanctuary where the city noise died. As they sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the tension between them was a physical weight. Every time he handed her a glass of water or guided her to a chair, there was a touch, a hand on the small of her back, a lingering graze of fingers against her wrist. The venom and the scar. The breaking point came when Ilara saw Mick downstairs laughing about how he'd fix her dog. When she returned to the penthouse, she was shaking, her eyes flashing with a venomous heat Julian had never seen. "He thinks he's a god because he's loud. He's a parasite. He ruins everything beautiful because he's too small to create anything. I want to see him lose everything. I want to see him beg." Julian watched her, his expression unreadable behind the mask. "You're very intense today, Ilara.
Did something happen in that life you don't talk about?" "He's not as good as he seems," she cried, turning to Julian. "People think he's just a loud neighbor, but he's a predator. He killed me once, and he'll do it again if I don't stop him." Julian didn't call her crazy. He didn't pull away. Instead, he stepped closer, his chest nearly touching hers. He reached for the straps of his mask. "Maybe I know a thing or two about men who think they are gods," he said softly. He pulled the mask away. A jagged, brutal scar ran from his jaw up toward his ear, a mark of a narrow escape from a fire meant to silence him. "That neighbor, Mick, he was the contractor who cut corners on my father's building. He was the one who trapped me in the flames to hide his theft. I've been waiting 10 years for someone to walk through that door with the same fire in their eyes that I have." He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers, a kiss that tasted of salt and revolution.
The penthouse was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a war room. Sunlight bled across the mahogany desk where blueprints of the apartment complex lay open like an anatomy of a beast. Julian stood behind Elara, his presence a steady heat. Every time he reached over her shoulder to point out a security blind spot or a structural weakness in Mick's apartment, his chest brushed her back, a deliberate, lingering pressure that told her she wasn't fighting alone. "This is where he thinks he's safest," whispered Julian, his breath stirring the hair at the nape of her neck. He traced a line on the map, his fingers grazing hers. But a man like Mick doesn't realize that his walls are made of the very secrets he's trying to hide. The death countdown Elara had promised wasn't a ticking clock. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling. It started with the small things. Mick's truck, his pride and joy, began to fail in ways no mechanic could explain. His bank accounts were flagged for irregularities Julian had quietly engineered. But the true venom came from Elara. She began to haunt the hallways like a beautiful, vengeful ghost. She would stand in the dim light of the 4th floor, Ghost sitting silently at her side, watching as Mick's mother struggled with groceries. When Mick would storm out, red-faced and screaming about his rotten luck, Elara would simply smile, a sharp, cold expression that never reached her eyes. One afternoon, Julian found her in the hallway, her face contorted with a hatred so pure it seemed to vibrate. She was staring at Mick's door, her knuckles white as she gripped Ghost's leash. "He's still laughing," she spat, her voice trembling. "I can hear him through the vents. He's laughing about how he's going to evict me. He has no idea what he took from me. He took my peace, Julian. He took my mind. In that other life, he made me believe I was the monster." Julian stepped into her space, his large hands coming up to cup her face. He didn't say, "Calm down." He didn't tell her to forget. He leaned down and pressed a slow, firm kiss to her forehead, then her temple. "Then let's show him what a real monster looks like," he murmured against her skin. "Tell me everything. Tell me the one thing he fears most." That night, in the soft glow of the penthouse fireplace, the perfect house felt more like a confessional. Elara sat on the plush rug, her head resting against Julian's knee. His hand was in her hair, his fingers rhythmically stroking the strands in a way that grounded her. "He thinks he's a family man," Elara said, her voice hollow, "but he's a blackmailer. That's how he kept his job after the fire you survived. He has a ledger, Julian. He keeps records of every shortcut, every bribe, every person he stepped on. He keeps it in the floorboards under his bed. He thinks it's his insurance policy."
Julian's hand stilled. He tilted her head back so he could look into her eyes. "How do you know that, Ilara? That wasn't in the police reports. That wasn't even in my private investigator's files." She took a shaky breath, turning around to face him. She took his scarred hand and pressed it to her heart. "Because in that other life, when I was at my lowest, I tried to break in. I wanted something to hold over him so he'd leave me alone. I found it, but he caught me. That's when he pushed me." The silence in the room was deafening. Julian's eyes darkened, a predatory hunger flaring in them. He realized then that Ilara wasn't just a victim of a bully. She was the witness to a decade of crime. "I thought I was the only one he broke," Julian whispered, his thumb tracing the jagged line of the scar on his own jaw. "I thought I was alone in this fire." He pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her like iron bands. He kissed her then, not a gentle touch, but a fierce, desperate claim. It was a kiss that promised blood for blood. "Tomorrow," Julian promised, his voice a low growl against her lips, "we don't just take his money or his truck, we take the ledger, and then, Ilara, we watch the entire 3-generation nightmare burn from the safety of the top floor."
The rain began as a low hum against the penthouse glass, a rhythmic static that masked the sound of Julian's tactical boots as he checked the feed on his tablet. He stood behind Ilara, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder, his thumb tracing the line of her collarbone through the thin fabric of her dark jacket. The heat of his palm was the only thing keeping her grounded as they watched the screen. Below, on the 4th floor, the distraction was in play. A staged electrical surge had knocked out the lights in Mick's hallway, and a delivery driver, one of Julian's associates, was currently loud and belligerent at the front desk, drawing the entire family, Mick included, down to the lobby to argue about a damaged package that didn't exist. "3 minutes, Ilara," Julian whispered, his voice vibrating against her ear. He leaned down, his lips grazing the shell of her ear in a ghost of a kiss that sent a shiver down her spine. "I've got you," he breathed against her lips before they slipped onto the 4th floor. The air in Mick's apartment was stale, smelling of old cigarettes and the looming rot of a dying legacy. Ilara felt the venom rising in her throat, a physical sickness as she stood in the room where her first life had been dismantled. She wanted to scream, to tear the wallpaper from the studs, but Julian was there, his hand sliding down to catch hers, his fingers interlacing with hers in a crushing, silent grip. He led her to the master bedroom, his eyes scanning the floorboards with a predator's precision. He knelt, his muscles rippling under his suit as he pried back the loose wood under the heavy bed frame. There it was, the ledger, bound in cheap black leather, smelling of damp earth and old sins. As he handed it to her, his fingers brushed hers, a lingering touch that felt like a silent pact. "He's coming back," Ilara whispered. Her eyes darted to the door as she heard the distant chime of the elevator. The venomous rage in her eyes softened for a moment into pure, raw terror. Julian didn't panic. He stood up, tucking the ledger into his jacket, and pulled her into his arms, shielding her body with his own as they backed into the shadows of the walk-in closet. He pressed a protective, lingering kiss to her temple, his hand over her mouth to catch her breath as the front door slammed open and Mick's heavy footsteps thudded into the hallway. "I know you're scared." Julian's voice was a mere vibration in the dark. "But remember, this is the last night he sleeps under a roof he thinks he owns."
He pulled his mask back into place, the silver glinting in the dark, and Ilara realized then that the death countdown wasn't just for Mick, it was the countdown to the moment she and Julian finally stopped being ghosts and started being the owners of their own fate.
The penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the servers and the frantic, rhythmic tapping of Julian's fingers as he uploaded the ledger to every major news outlet and the internal affairs division of the city. Ilara stood at the floor-to-ceiling glass, her breath fogging the window as she watched the flashing lights of a squad car pull into the street far below. Ghost sat at her heels, his ears perked, sensing the shift in the air. Julian finished the final transfer and stood, walking toward her with a predatory grace. He didn't say a word, he simply slid his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her back against the solid heat of his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his fingers interlacing over her stomach, a grounding, heavy weight that reminded her she was no longer alone in her skin. "It's done," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that traveled through her spine. "The Emperor of Apartment 4B is about to lose his crown." Ilara's eyes were fixed on Mick, who was currently being cornered by officers in the lobby on the security feed. A dark, venomous heat flared in her chest, a hatred so old and deep it felt like it belonged to a different century. "He's a monster," she spat, her voice trembling with a raw, jagged edge. "He thinks because he can shout louder and hit harder, he owns the world. He's not as good as he seems, Julian. He's a parasite who feeds on the weak, pretending he's a king while he builds his throne on the bones of people like me." She turned in his arms, her hands clutching the lapels of his jacket. "In that other life, he was untouchable. He was the emperor of my nightmare." Julian watched her, his expression softening with a profound, quiet understanding. He reached up, his thumb brushing against her lower lip before sliding up to trace the edge of the silver mask he still wore. "Maybe I think I know a thing or two about that," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of a decade of hidden pain. He slowly unclipped the mask, letting it fall to the plush rug. The scar on his face was stark in the moonlight, a jagged silver line that marked his survival. "That's the story behind the scar I have. I wasn't just a victim of his fire. I was the witness to the man he truly is. He tried to erase me because I saw the truth behind his good neighbor mask." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling in the darkened room. "But tonight, Ilara, the truth is the only thing left standing." He captured her lips in a kiss that was a promise and a revolution, his hands sliding up to cradle her head as the sound of sirens finally reached their floor. Below them, the doors to apartment 4B were kicked in, and the Nightmare family was dragged into the light, their reign of terror ending in the back of a van, while the two architects of their downfall watched from the sanctuary of the sky.